It started with a dare. I was in Paris for a semester abroad, an art history student with a thirst for adventure and perhaps a bit too much hubris. Over wine and cheap cigarettes at a dimly lit cafe, I had mentioned wanting to visit the catacombs. The locals exchanged glances, their faces half lit by flickering candlelight. One of them, a wiry man named Jules with a mischievous smile, leaned in and said, "Not the tourist path, the real catacombs." The idea was intoxicating, forbidden, and thrilling. I agreed immediately. Jules met me at midnight the next day, a flashlight in his hand and a smug grin on his face. We entered through an unmarked gate in the 14th arrondissement, past a crumbling fence where graffiti whispered warnings in a language I didn't understand. He handed me a second flashlight. "Whatever you do," he said, "stay close to me. People get lost down here all the time. And don't touch anything." The air grew colder as we descended, the city's hum vanishing behind layers of stone and soil. The spiral staircase seemed endless, twisting deeper into the earth. By the time we reached the bottom, my legs ached, and my breath fogged in the damp air. "This is just the beginning," Jules said, his voice echoing in the silence. The tourist route was far behind us. These tunnels were dark, unmarked, and unkempt. Bones lined the walls, stacked neatly at first, but growing more haphazard the farther we ventured. My flashlight danced over skulls staring back with empty eyes, femurs and ribs tangled in grotesque configurations. "Why are they like this?" I asked, unable to keep the tremor out of my voice. "They say it's from cave-ins," Jules replied, though his voice lacked conviction. "Or maybe something else." I laughed nervously, but the sound fell flat. The silence swallowed it whole. As we walked, Jules began to tell me about the cataphiles, urban explorers who knew these tunnels like the backs of their hands. He described secret parties, hidden chambers, even entire underground lakes. But there was another group, he said. One no one spoke about. "They're not cataphiles," Jules whispered, his voice low. "They're something else. Call them the inner inhabitants, people who went down and never came back. They say the darkness changes them." I forced a laugh, hoping to drown the chill creeping up my spine. "Sounds like a ghost story." Jules didn't answer. The deeper we went, the stranger the tunnels became. The air grew heavier, tinged with an earthy rot that clung to the back of my throat. My flashlight flickered, and I tapped it nervously, the beam stuttering before holding steady. And then we heard it. A low, rhythmic sound. A scrape, then a shuffle, like bare feet dragging across stone. Jules stopped abruptly, his body tense. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. He nodded, his hand tightening around the flashlight. "Stay close." We turned a corner, and the sound grew louder. My heart thudded in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears. The walls here were different, carved with crude symbols and strange patterns. My flashlight revealed faces etched into the stone, their features twisted in agony or rage. "That's not graffiti," Jules muttered, his voice shaking. The noise grew louder, now accompanied by a faint, guttural chanting. I felt something brush past my ankle and yelped, but when I looked down, there was nothing there. "Jules," I hissed, "we should go back." He didn't respond. Ahead of us, the tunnel opened into a vast chamber. The ceiling was high, lost in shadows, and the walls were lined with countless bones. In the center of the room stood a massive stone altar, stained dark with something I didn't want to identify. And around it they gathered. They were human, at least they had been once. Their skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched tightly over skeletal frames. Eyes glinted in the darkness, reflecting the light like those of an animal. They wore scraps of clothing, little more than rags, and their movements were jerky, unnatural. One of them looked up, sniffing the air like a predator scenting prey. Its gaze locked onto us. "Run," Jules whispered, grabbing my arm. We turned and fled, the beam of my flashlight bouncing wildly across the walls. Behind us, the chanting ceased, replaced by the sound of pounding feet and guttural growls. "Faster," Jules shouted, his voice rising in panic. The tunnels twisted and turned, every path looking the same. I stumbled, my foot catching on a loose stone, and Jules yanked me to my feet before I could fall. The growls grew closer, echoing all around us. "Laughed," Jules barked, pulling me into a narrower passage. The walls were closer here, pressing in on us, the bones brushing against my shoulders. My breath came in ragged gasps, the air too thin, too damp. My flashlight flickered again, and this time it didn't come back on. "Jules," I cried, my voice cracking. "Just keep running," he yelled. But I couldn't see him anymore. The darkness was absolute, swallowing everything. I ran blindly, hands outstretched, feeling the cold, damp walls scrape against my palms. And then I heard it. A scream. Jules's scream, sharp and guttural, cut off abruptly. "Jules?" I whispered, my voice trembling. Silence. And then, breathing. Slow, ragged, and close. I pressed myself against the wall, my heart hammering in my chest. I could feel them, their presence in the dark, surrounding me. Fingers brushed against my arm, thin, cold, and claw-like. I ran. I don't know how I found my way out. I stumbled through the tunnels, driven by sheer terror, my lungs burning and my legs threatening to give out. The growls and footsteps followed me, always just a step behind. When I finally saw light, faint, flickering light, I sprinted toward it, my body moving on pure adrenaline. I burst out into the open air, collapsing onto the damp ground. I turned back, expecting to see them emerging from the tunnel. But there was nothing. Only the yawning blackness of the entrance. Jules never came out. I reported him missing, but the authorities shrugged it off. "People get lost down there all the time," they said. "If you're lucky, he'll find his way back." But I knew the truth. He wouldn't. I still dream about the catacombs, about the inner inhabitants and their twisted forms. Sometimes I wake up hearing their growls, feeling their cold fingers brushing against my skin. I should have listened to Jules. Never go into the dark.